recognized virologist,
Dr. Robert Malone.
How can we ever trust these organizations? How can we ever trust our governments? If folks are thinking that this is all over and it was just some benign mismanagement, I've got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell.
When the next pandemic comes, and it will,
we're all really conditioned. If anybody said the word lockdown now, everyone knows the drill. And because of the psyops and the nudges now, when they want to do it again, most of the population will be so conditioned, even subconsciously, to snap back in line.
There are people who are vaccine injured, and they have not been allowed to speak. They've lost their jobs, they've lost their livelihoods. I strongly encourage that we acknowledge these individuals. We work together in helping to discover and identify potential treatments and therapies so that they can be made whole and that they be compensated for the damages that they've incurred as a consequence of the policies that have been implemented.
If people aren't willing to say this was wrong, if they're not willing to stand up for their rights, then this will become the new normal, as it already has.
I spend most of my day talking about these issues, and we talk about property rights, and then lately I've been talking about digital property rights. Owning your digital property, which could mean your medical records, could mean your identity, and without property ownership, at the end of the day, there is no freedom.
The good news is that at least we're seeing the threat and talking about it.
Yeah, I hope people are listening now and are prepared.
If you care about yourself and your children, it's time to get engaged and wake up.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs, sharing our vulnerability, overcoming our fears, transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go? This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Robert Malone, the internationally renowned physician, virologist, immunologist, biochemist, and author. You are credited as the original inventor of mRNA delivery and vaccination as a technology, and has spent much of the last 40 years working on vaccine development with extensive experience in drug repurposing for infectious disease outbreaks. You have submitted almost 100 scientific peer-reviewed publications and have been invited as a speaker at over 100 conferences. More recently, you have been subjected to censorship and defamation because you have criticized the U.S. government for its methods and standards of bringing vaccines to market in a safe and effective manner. You ultimately believe that we must demand transparency from our governments and big pharma, and that no person with facts or evidence should be denied the right to challenge, debate, or protest. Because of the real threat of censorship, can everyone watching this please share it to all of your contacts, social media channels, and Telegram or Signal groups before it gets taken down. And of course, the full unedited and uncensored episode will always be available at londonreal.tv/Malone. Doctor, welcome back to London Real.
Hi, Brian. How are you doing?
I'm great.
Good to be here.
I'm great. I think last time you were here, you were in London. It was just over 3.5 months ago. And, every time I blink, it seems like you have a whole host of new things to talk about. And, I don't know where to start, but I think I'll start by jumping in at the thing that maybe has me most concerned, and that is this pandemic preparedness treaty that we've seen the WHO talking about, and you've been trying to break it down and give exposure to this plan. When I read it, I mean, it seems very dystopian and gives me flashbacks to some of my guests that told me about this dangerous future. Maybe for people that haven't really even heard what this is, can you break down what it is, why it's on your radar, and maybe what we should be doing about it?
So just to start, we actually have twin initiatives being advanced at the World Health Organization and its affiliates at the United Nations. Those would be the Pandemic Treaty, Pandemic Preparedness Treaty, and the International Health Regulations updates, technically, which were proposed by our government, our Department of Health and Human Services, as a modification of the existing international health regulations, which have largely been up to date, up to the current date, optional or suggestions provided by the World Health Organization. The proposal that I've heard is that the enforcement arm for these new initiatives, by the way, would be the World Trade Organization. So the teeth behind the jaw here of Mr. Tedros would be, and his colleagues would be, the potential for economic sanctions on a nation state or a region or a populace should they not comply with the edicts that would emerge from this clearly globalist captured body that we call the World Health Organization that has a very large fraction of its funding coming from the Chinese Communist Party and from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, among many others. It's important to understand just as background, and I've been aware of this on a very personal level from my time when I was working with New Link Genetics in the U.S. Department of Defense to advance an Ebola vaccine that we eventually sold off to Merck and became the licensed Merck Ebola vaccine. The World Health Organization has become increasingly dependent on, let's call it, private donations. What that computes to is that, for instance, in our case, when the GSK vaccine product for Ebola started faltering, and it became clear that this small independent company based in Ames, Iowa, that had acquired the Canadian-developed Public Health Agency Canada-developed vaccine product became the leading candidate, we were approached by the then Director General basically with a very clear-cut advocacy that now that we were the leader, we should make a large donation to the World Health Organization. It was basically a shakedown. The WHO relies on not just donations from nation states or from non-governmental organizations, but increasingly from pharma. And one of the ways that that game is played is that since they have a lot of open offices and unfilled need for full-time employees, what's done is that pharma will contribute FTE sponsorship to the World Health Organization, have a hand in choosing the personnel selected to fill those positions. And then those people function in a dual agency manner where they're representing the interests of the pharmaceutical sponsor as well as the interests of whatever they've been tasked with at the World Health Organization. So we can go on and on about the corruption within the WHO. It's well documented. And just to kind of put a capstone on that, I remind the audience of the fiasco that was the global health emergency associated with the monkeypox virus, which clearly demonstrates the arbitrary and capricious nature of Mr. Tedros' leadership when he first convened a group of scientists to evaluate whether or not there was a world health crisis associated with monkeypox. They determined that there was not. So he changed the composition of the committee and then reconvened it for another opinion. And that opinion came down as as I recall, 9-6 vote against declaring it a public health crisis or emergency. At which point, Mr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, doctor, determined that this was a tie, 9-6. And so he would have to break the tie and personally declare a public health emergency. Now, why does this matter for this new initiative having to do with a global pandemic planning treaty, although that's not the official language used in the United States, and the modification of the international health regulations? This new language in both of these documents would basically give to Mr. Tedros absolute authority to declare a public health emergency and to determine what the measures should be taken to mitigate that public health emergency. There's no constraints on what would constitute a public health emergency. So this would be whatever Mr. Tedros at the moment considers to be a public health emergency. Maybe London has a public health emergency of too many Indian food restaurants. I don't know. It's whatever he determines. In the United States, of course, we're very concerned that he would determine that there was a public health emergency of gun violence and mandate actions that would be contrary to the First Amendment of the Constitution or Second Amendment of the Constitution. So what we have are a set of documents that are proceeding through various World Health Organization committees and also national oversight committees having to do with augmented authority and power and basically conceding sovereignty to a internationalist body that has treaty relationships and funding relationships with the World Economic Forum, Pharma, Bill and Melinda Gates, CCP, et cetera, as I mentioned. And this is the second go-round of negotiations on this regarding the international health regulations. In the initial embodiment, it was much more unilaterally authoritarian, one might say, giving the power to the World Health Organization and executive specifically to take a series of actions such as I've described. And there was an uproar in small pockets of resistance in the Five Eyes nations, particularly the United States, Canada, and Great Britain. But in particular, there was resistance under the former leadership of Brazil, some of the Latin American countries, and some African countries in the guise of concern about loss of sovereignty, because part and parcel of this is that not only would the World Health Organization and its leadership have the ability to declare an emergency whenever they feel fit, so inclined, and to declare what measures should be taken, ergo, which vaccine you should have to take, what medicine you should have to take, what treatment protocols your physicians would be allowed to deploy, all the kinds of things that we've seen deployed by nation states, particularly the Five Eyes nations over the last 3 years, would then vest with the World Health Organization. And by the way, to fund that, there would be a tax imposed on all of the nations that is a function of their health budgets. And so since the United States spends far more than any other country on its medical care, it would bear a larger burden of the costs of this. And there was significant objection in the African states, in Latin America and Brazil, as I mentioned, and that caused a backtracking on the prior versions that were much more explicit about the authority of the WHO to impose these things unilaterally. Many interpreted this as, including myself, as the African states standing up for their personal sovereignty, their national sovereignty. There is a opposing narrative that, in fact, the African states' primary objective was that they weren't getting enough of the goodies under these terms and conditions. And since that time, there have been a number of initiatives announced in Africa, including the build out of a new mRNA vaccine manufacturing facility. And so the skeptical among us believe that the African objections in the prior round may be overcome in the current round. So we may not be able to rely on that as we did previously. So in sum, we appear to have a sort of a power grab. That would be the pessimist version of this by a internationalist organization that has, I think most objective eyes would say, grossly failed in meeting its mission over the last 3 years. Been plagued by lack of transparency, corruption, and various forms of compromise, that now would be granted unilateral authority to both survey, the pessimist might say spy, on the activities of nation states, set up their own observation capability in independent nation states, to be able to detect the emergence of a potential global health emergency. And there is a component of this that's forward-looking, so that they would not only be watching to detect emerging infectious disease or other public health emergencies, but potential public health emergency. So this maps into the topic area of One World Health, where the WHO believes that its mission should be expanded to cover animal health, agricultural health, plant health, climate, etc., because it's all one global problem, and they're the ones to solve it with their unelected form of management. So that's kind of where this is all heading. And the key question is, has the train already left the station? And all we are is observers griping and sniping from the sidelines. I had the pleasure of being on Neil Oliver's GB News broadcast on Coronation Day, where we talked about this. And of course, because GB News now is scared of its shadow in the form of the BBC censorship organization, or national, I guess it's the National Censorship Board. I don't really understand this, but there it is. You guys seem to be going hell-bent for leather to mimic the situation in Canada, I guess. So when going on Neil's show, we weren't allowed to talk about the vaccines because that could get them into trouble. But we had, of course, the required, I guess, government-approved counterpoint person sitting in on this, who made the case that, well, the current language in the international health regulation modifications make it clear now that the intent is not to compromise the sovereignty of individuals or nation states, and has some softened language to that extent concerning the requirement versus the option to comply. But my counterpoint to this gentleman was, given our experience of the last 3 years, I find this soft and squishy wording unreassuring. I prefer to see very explicit wording saying that these will not be used to compromise the sovereignty of independent nation states, and that the World Health Organization will not have the option to implement unilateral policies superseding those that are determined by the leadership of each independent autonomous nation state. That's the kind of language I want to see. Not, well, maybe we don't really want to do this to you, but we might. I find after the last 3 years, any crack in the wall that they can squeeze their agenda through, I'm skeptical that they will do so, given the opportunity. And so what I want to see is a pretty well-built wall. about 50 feet thick to prevent this after the bungling and incompetence and corruption that we've seen, in my opinion. So there's my not so short synopsis, Brian. I hope that provided a reasonable introduction to the topic. I think that we are, and many others in my world, think that we are facing a true threat, not just an existential threat, to independence and sovereignty by another one of these organizations that are wedded to the idea that a decentralized world governance structure comprising independent autonomous nation states is obsolete and inadequate for addressing global problems. And we must have a centralized command economy based utilitarian approach grounded in the thesis that the reason why centralized command economy utilitarian approaches have always failed in the past. And of course, there's many philosophical and political science terms we could apply to that. But the reason they failed is apparently they didn't have enough data. And if they only had enough data that they could feed into their new AI algorithms and spreadsheets, then centralized planned economies would work spectacularly. I suspect that probably you and your audience would disagree with that thesis.
Yeah, well, I got a real crash course in what the WHO is and was kind of in April 2020. And I'd say maybe most of the world doesn't know much about it. It's got an amazing sounding name, the World Health Organization. And when you first heard about it back in 2020, you just assumed they knew what they were doing. Luckily, I was one of the few people that had various guests on my show that started breaking down the very, very dark side of what the WHO, from Tedros to the Gates funding and then the way it's continued to the CCP funding. And, at the time also, when YouTube was censoring me, they said, you can't say anything against what the WHO said. That was their de facto guideline at the time, even though they were actually...
Absolutely. That stems from the BBC's Trusted News Initiative in part.
Right. Okay.
The Trusted News Initiative, which you have so kindly given to us, us being the rest of the world, courtesy of your BBC, defines misinformation as anything which is contrary to that information being shared by the World Health Organization or your national health authority. So whether it's true or false is irrelevant. What matters is only that you literally toe the party line. I mean, Stalin would be proud.
Yeah, it's flabbergasting. All you have to do is look into it briefly. And again, the BBC were ultimately responsible with getting us, banned on YouTube, because they were actually watching my massive live broadcast on April 6th. And it was actually them that called YouTube out that ended up getting that video pulled. So which is odd, because I didn't think they were a policing organization, but they kind of...
Silly you.
Yeah. They kind of self-appointed.
They've recently upped their game now, haven't they?
Yeah.
With this new initiative.
It's pretty incredible when you go deep here, and it gets dark very fast. And again, you can go deeper down the rabbit hole and look at the way that they even went to check out the Wuhan lab and just a half-assed investigation by the WHO there, and all the links. I mean, it's downright shocking when you get into it. So the fact that this organization would be taking away sovereign decisions based on the whim of a single individual who's clearly been compromised by various types of funding and special interests, it's something we all want to be aware of. And then, Robert, when you talk about how they can quickly add in climate or any other quote unquote threat or disaster to it, and then you see these 15-minute cities, and then you see
too many pubs in Britain. We've got to do something about alcoholism.
Right. I mean, all of a sudden you can see how it can be used to control the population. And then when you dive into your sovereignty initiative and you look at the rise of CBDCs, and then what, again, China's doing with the social scores and the monitoring and the facial recognition and the 5G, you can quickly see how the last lockdown in 2020 and 2021 is child's play compared to what could be happening in the future, where, you know, you won't even have a choice, perhaps, because everything will be suspended and you might not even know what the hell is even going on.
Well, and now suddenly the Tom Cruise kind of future dystopia of Minority Report looks prescient.
Yeah. And specifically in there to remind people, like, what are you seeing there? That control of information, that watching of everybody.
Yeah. So it's a truly the gift that you have given us, not just the Trusted News Initiative, you being British culture, of course, is Mr. Huxley and Mr. Orwell, who so presciently foresaw all of this and warned us about it in so many different ways. Although I'm not completely convinced that Mr. Huxley wasn't in part an advocate for a lot of these social mind control technologies. But there it is. We it's wake up time. Wake up, or do you is this the world you want to live in? I think that you're, from the little I know about your clientele, these are folks that believe in capitalism, believe in free markets, believe in individual autonomy and sovereignty. And as I mentioned on Neil, that seemed to be the quote that lit people up. In a world in which governments are willing and capable of deploying these advanced psyops technologies, like neurolinguistic programming, nudge, etc., the concept of sovereignty becomes obsolete. It is irrelevant. It's an anachronism. I was mentioning the gentleman that was my counterpoint, my gentle counterpoint on Neil Oliver, who's making the case that the way elections work in a representative democracy, or whatever it is that you guys have in the UK, I'm not sure what the term is that every 4 years, the people have an election, and then they basically concede their sovereignty to those elected officials for a 4-year period. And then they get another shot at it 4 years later, was the case he was making. And that during that interim, the government operates with relative autonomy and authority to act in whatever fashion it deems appropriate. In a world in which these advanced psychological manipulation technologies are governments are willing and able to deploy them, 4 years is plenty long enough to convince the majority of the population that the Earth is flat and the moon is made of green cheese. This is extremely dangerous, because even though it may be that 5 or 25% of us who value our freedom are aware or awake of what's going on, that does not constitute an electoral majority. The vast majority of the population is readily manipulated by fear, as we've seen, and many other methods, and will go along with the authority figures quite readily. And where does that leave the likes of you, me, and those of us that are cut from the same cloth? I'm concerned that over the shorter term, we are facing some considerable challenges to our ability to live in a world that we have taken for granted.
It's interesting because a lot of people aren't thinking about this anymore because they're traveling freely, they're not wearing masks, et cetera, et cetera. And, my guest back in 2020 reminded this kind of totalitarian tiptoe where they kind of take a lot of freedoms away and then give some back. And now we're all really conditioned. If anybody said the word lockdown now, everyone knows the drill. And if everyone knows the QR code and they know this, so we've all been kind of conditioned to a lot of these expectations. And because of the psyops and the nudges now, still the narrative, mostly here and probably in America, and I know you were just in Europe, and I'd like to talk about what happened in the parliament, but that is of, the shaming going on with the unvaxxed and, the gaslighting of the vaccine injured. And, it pretty much still is, like you said, 75, 80% of the population of the narrative supported by the media, as you mentioned, is what was done was basically right. And, when they want to do it again, most of the population will be so conditioned, even subconsciously, to snap back in line. And but I would say most people are walking around thinking that will never happen again.
Good luck on that. As I recall, there was a poll in the UK about a month and a half ago that looked at how the population perceived these various government responses. And just before that poll came out, I had the pleasure of speaking with Nigel Farage in a couple of different venues, including CPAC. And then, of course, when I visited you, I visited him also. And I see Nigel as a bit of a mentor, as somebody who I can learn a lot from, given the battles that he's been through. And I always listen to what he says. He was making the case that the one clear government overreach that was undeniable was the lockdowns. And he was recommending that people, for political reasons, don't focus on the jab and the consequences and the toxicities and all that, because we can go around and around and you can pick your data, I can pick mine. But rather, we should focus on the lockdowns because that was unequivocal. And then a poll came out from the UK, as you probably remember, that I think it was Nigel's comment. I'm not sure if he was the one that made the observation that based on this poll, if lockdown was a political party in the UK, it would win the next election hands down and control the parliament. The British people, as you point out, have been clearly conditioned to believe a falsehood that the lockdown policies were safe and effective, when in fact they were enormously destructive, both life, property, freedom, education. We can go on and on and on. They were just, and no surprise, it was well embedded in the literature previously that lockdowns were not a solution to a public health emergency that now we also see in retrospect was overplayed, that it was not, I like to say, just by, to help people think about things. If this was Ebola, if this was a aerosol transmitted Ebola, and I happen to know that there was war game scenarios played out during the original West African outbreak, that if this was to become an aerosolized Ebola, we would see over 1 billion dead globally. And of course, Ebola is a nasty death. That did not manifest, thank God, and probably never will. Let's hope. But for the sake of argument, the truth is that the Merck Ebola vaccine that I helped work on is a nasty piece of work. You feel like you feel pretty miserable after you take that vaccine. Joint aches, fevers, all kinds of stuff. Okay, it's a nasty vaccine. In our business, the slang is it's hot, and people would line up to take it. If we had an Ebola-like outbreak that was truly a major global health threat of the type that was promoted, that we were told that this was going to be, people dying in the streets, mass graves, freezer vans full of bodies, blah, 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 blah. All that stuff that we saw that was hyped, that we now know almost all of it was propaganda. But if that had really been the case, we would not have needed mandates. Even if this is a partially effective vaccine, turns out it's not really effective for much of anything. We're down to arguing about whether or not it has any benefits for long-term sickness, and death. But the data aren't even supporting that. But you would not have had to employ these methods if you had a true major pathogenic risk. That, I think, is one of the most troubling things to me, is how they got it so wrong about the risk that we were facing and use that to justify all these policies, including the economic ones. It is hard not to go down conspiracy row. When you confront the kind of gross overreaction to the nature of the pathogenic threat. And it's really hard not to conclude that there were multiple ulterior motives here at play. And so if that's the case, even if we have to say, well, there's a 60% probability that there were other agendas, just trying to be a centrist on this. Personally, I think it's way more than 60%, but let's just say that it could have gone either way. Even if that's the case, how can we ever trust these organizations? Again, how can we ever trust our governments? And this gets to, they're having to be dragged kicking and screaming to transparency. Recently, we had, I think at the beginning of this week, some amazing disclosures from Australia, consequent to a Freedom of Information Act from a conservative MP. And of course, we had the lockdown files from the UK and the Twitter files from the United States and the various disclosures from Canada. If folks are thinking that this is all over and it was just some benign mismanagement, I've got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell.
Yeah, and I hope people are listening now and are prepared for what's happening next, and also to make sure these things aren't happening with WHO. I want to ask you a little bit about any new vaccine side effects that you're seeing, and also what you were doing in the European Parliament, because I think you were talking a little bit about the vaccine injured there.
So I have the benefit, I don't practice, just to be clear, I don't practice medicine, but I have the benefit of being on a weekly Zoom calls with a group of very competent, open-minded physicians that go by various names like Public Health Alliance or Global COVID Summit. And they are discussing, there seems to be another surge right now going on. It may be influenza B. There seems to be another a variant of SARS-CoV-2 going around, but it's not as pathogenic. There appears to be, maybe it's more and more awareness of the vaccine injured and some of the more subtle nuances associated with that. Of course, the ones that are most concerning have to do with reproductive health. And that was something that was covered in the International COVID Summit, a different group, meeting in the European Parliament, was it 2 Wednesdays ago, or maybe it was 3, I'm not sure, time flies, in Brussels, where we had 2 speakers addressing reproductive risks, and then others addressing various other forms of toxicity, and a pathologist from Germany that reported on a case series of over 70 autopsies. As you'll recall, there have been major impediments to doing what is the classical quality control process in medicine, which is the autopsy. But we're finally starting to get those data. Let's start with the autopsy data first. One of the things that I found most striking was this, we've all heard about the blood clots And clearly, the spike protein interacts with ACE2 and TMPRSS. These are critical pathways in regulation of a bunch of biologic processes. And so it's no surprise that spike is a toxin. It's directly toxic. It's neurotoxic. There are many neurologic side effects that are being disclosed. But in one of the things that I had not seen previously that is being shown in this autopsy series is the damage to the small fiber bundles in skin that is widespread in these patients that have been vaccine damaged. And so there seems to be a widespread loss of basically skin integrity, the fibers in skin. And this causes accelerated aging is the gross appearance that you see, but it has a lot of other implications. So that was a new one. Male infertility and male reproductive consequences was highlighted. And one of the things that I had never thought about that was brought out is that both the virus and the vaccine via spike are, the spike antigen that goes systemic, are affecting vascular flow in male reproductive tissue, which is, of course, important for a variety of things that we don't need to go into, but is self-evident. But, that's all about blood pressure. But what I hadn't thought about is that it's also altering temperature in gonadal tissue, which is crucial for maintaining integrity of sperm manufacturing. So this is one of the reasons why men have the anatomy and males have the anatomy that they have with their reproductive tissue, where it's outside of the body and can have its temperature more carefully regulated. So there's that. There's sperm count issues. In the female infertility, there's a growing wave of concern and documentation supporting the long observed alteration of menstruation and the apparent or repeatedly reported by many obstetricians increased incidence of spontaneous abortion in the first and second trimester, in particular in the vaccinated women, and anecdotal reports of increased incidence of birth defects in the vaccinated pregnant women, particularly if they receive the vaccine product in the first and second trimester. And we've had now reveals through a variety of sources that although it was asserted that these products were adequately tested as being safe in pregnancy, those the term that comes to mind is those clinical trials were aborted prematurely. And I'm sorry to make light of that, but it's true. They were not completed. They were not rigorous. And the technical scientific basis for making those claims about lack of risk in reproduction are not supported by solid data. And now we have increasing information coming out in ways, it's coming out largely through anecdotal reports from practicing obstetricians and pediatricians, because this is still a highly sensitive and censored topic. We can't discuss reproductive harm, which is shocking to me and completely contrary to established ethics. So the reproductive, and then we have the additional log on the fire from this young gentleman from Pfizer. I don't remember if we discussed it during my prior visit with you. This is the James O'Keefe, before it's actually what caused Project Veritas to blow up, quite literally. I was fortunate to have dinner with James O'Keefe 2 weeks ago down in Southern California. And he told us a lot of the backstory of what had happened. And absolutely, this was triggered by the success of that sting operation on that Pfizer executive. What was buried, many people did not appreciate. And I think it was in the third tranche of.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below. So Jim Rickards has just recorded a video that's not available to anyone in the public, and he's going to be talking about how this upcoming recession is going to be fast, it's going to be bloody, it's going to be nasty. But at the same time, he's going to show you how you can position yourself to profit from all of this chaos. Now, we've made this video only available to our viewers. Go to londonreal.tv/Jim, watch that immediately. I can't say enough good things about Jim Rickards. He understands the global economic system better than any guest I've ever had on London Real. His predictions are almost uncannily true, and you can learn how to profit from his vision, from his expertise, and his understanding of economics. So go to londonreal.tv/Jim or click the link below. It's an excellent, excellent look on what's going to happen in the future and how you can position yourself to profit from that. Jim is one of the best in the business, one of my favorite guests on London Real, and he's very, very good at predicting the future and showing us all to profit from it. So click the link, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, it's Brian Rose, founder of the DeFi Academy. I've told you my 4-week crypto bootcamp is amazing, but don't take my word for it. This is what my students are saying.
The DeFi Academy was an amazing experience for me. It took me totally out of my comfort zone.
In this course, I was challenged, I was held accountable, and pushed to do things that honestly weren't always easy.
It's been phenomenal, and I can't believe we're already up on our 4 weeks. It has flown by.
Going through this DeFi accelerator by far was one of the best courses I've taken.
You do this course, you really get into the nitty-gritty of the activities that will make you comfortable with decentralized finance.
Thank you so much to Brian and everyone at London Real and the DeFi Academy for even putting together an amazing course like this.
Anybody else that wants to do it, please sign up. It is well worth the money.